Welcome back, everyone, to the Rabbi Avi Show. If you tuned into our last episode, you listened to an incredible, deeply personal conversation with Chloe Loos, exploring her profound journey away from the dogmas of the far left and into a strong, unapologetic Jewish identity and connection to Israel. Today's episode is a direct, powerful continuation of that exact theme, but this time, we're looking at it through the lens of high-level academia, institutional power, and systemic law. As we trace this landscape, we're going to circle back to some foundational subtopics like Christian Zionism, which we first unpacked at the very beginning of our season with my dear friend, Pastor Jeff Logston. You can go back and listen to that episode if you didn't hear it. Before we dive into this incredible hour, I want to remind you that the Rabbi Avi Show is a proud part of the Horizontal Media Network. We are committed to bringing you these long-form, deeply nuanced, and completely independent conversations that you simply cannot find in mainstream sound bites. But independent media requires independent backing. If you find value in what we're building here, please consider supporting us financially. Head over to patreon.com/horizontal media. Your monthly partnerships are what keep our studio running, our mic lines open, and our content completely free from corporate influence. That's patreon.com/horizontal media. We deeply appreciate your support. Now on to today's guest. Every now and then, we have the privilege of sitting down with someone whose life story reads like a literal roadmap of the shifting cultural and intellectual landscapes of our time. Dr. Molly Dunn holds a PhD in Justice Studies from Arizona State University, my alma mater, a master's degree in criminal justice from Eastern Kentucky, and a deep foundation in gender and women's studies. As a former faculty member at Northern Arizona University in criminology and criminal justice, Molly's early academic life was deeply, intimately steeped in the world of the far left, critical theory, where she deconstructed systems of power, wrote extensively on feminist criminology, and examined the intersecting dynamics of race, gender, and religion in America. But sometimes the very theories we teach are put to the ultimate test by reality. After finding herself at the center of a high-profile systemic anti-Semitism crisis within the university system, a battle she courageously fought and successfully settled with the backing of major pro-Israel legal advocates, Molly experienced a profound ideological evolution. She moved from the deconstructive frameworks of the progressive far left to a vibrant, active position in the pro-Israel political center. Today, she serves right here in our own backyard as the Education Associate for the Center for Jewish Resilience under the Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona. We're going to trace that remarkable journey today, from the ivory tower to community building, from deconstruction to defense, and what it truly means to build Jewish resilience in Southern Arizona. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Many Jewish intellectuals have experienced a profound sense of political homelessness or a shifting of priorities over the last few years, moving away from the progressive left toward the political center. What was the specific catalyst for you? Was it a gradual realization during your academic career, or did the reality of campus anti-Semitism force a sudden break?
I would say it's a combination of the two. So when I was writing my dissertation, I began exploring the gaps and omissions of Jewish identity within the context of racism in the early 20th century. Through this research, we never discussed Jewish identity when I was in graduate school. So when I started finding Jewish scholars, scholars writing about Jewish history, I was incredibly intrigued. And I started tracking and tracing these sort of patterns of exclusion and omission and distortion about the Jewish people in the United States. And while I was tracking these patterns, I started experiencing the sort of repercussions that I was tracking and documenting directly while writing my dissertation from my committee.
Well, tell us about the ramifications of that.
Yeah, that was incredibly difficult. So I come from a program where focusing on your positionality, your social position in society is extremely important for prefacing any sort of research that you do. So particularly if you're a minority, it's common to say, I'm a, for example, like cisgendered white male, blah blah blah, and this sort of identity frames how I see the world. So
That's
that's
like the starting point.
yes, that's the starting point. And so because, I'm Ashkenazi, I presented to everyone as a white woman on campus. I wasn't encountering any research about Jewish experiences or Jewish identity, and so I just wrote from the perspective of a white woman, and I read a lot of historical literature about white women in sort of feminist movements, all the way to the Ku Klux Klan, women of the Klan, and this was really informing how I was writing about my research until I started encountering the Jewish people.
Wow.
Yeah.
As someone with a PhD in justice studies, you know the language of the far left intimately. How do you view those academic frameworks now? Do you see them as fundamentally flawed, or do you believe they were valuable tools that have been weaponized to exclude and target the Jewish community?
I think that the frameworks that I learned about in graduate school, and I started at Arizona State University in 2016, so right before Donald Trump was elected. And I was very much a leftist. When I entered this program, it was clear that there was no separating scholarship from activism. Like, to be a good scholar, you're a good activist. So the theories that we were learning about, we were trying to implement on the ground in society through the BLM movement, for example, through when we had the Dakota Access Pipeline was a really big thing. That was another way that we were sort of using these ideas of decolonialism, settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, all of the terms, to sort of understand oppression. And I don't think that these frameworks were useless whatsoever. I think they were really helpful for helping me understand inequality, state power, state violence, the histories of minorities in this country. The problem was that when it came to 10/7, and even prior to that, I began to recognize that these frameworks were no longer fitting when it came to the history and contemporary realities of the Jewish people.
So, how did that realization, when it comes to the Jewish people, did that all? Obviously, that's kind of a opens a Pandora's box. I'm sure, as a
Oh,
Jewish
yeah.
person, how did that also? I'm curious. Did that filter down into other theories about other peoples as well, or did you primarily just focus on the Jewish people?
It really only didn't fit for the Jewish people. Um, so for example, I've shared this with you before. I used to really I don't know if I considered myself an anti-Zionist because it wasn't an identity at the time, but I very much believed in anti-Zionist ideology because it just naturally fit with all of these other theories of understanding oppression from minority groups, if that makes sense. It made me want to use these theories and apply them accurately to the Jewish people. And it really excited me. So even though I came to this research sort of through the study of anti-Semitism, it also gave me a framework for understanding Jewish peoplehood that I actually didn't get growing up in the Reform synagogue at all, or at least it wasn't the way that I was educated about Jewish identity did not resonate with me in a way that was able to withstand the anti-Semitism that I would encounter in college.
In the reform movement, obviously, part of the thinking is that we're dealing with a religion, not necessarily a people.
Yes, and that was the beginning of the problem for me because I truly didn't understand that we were a people. Even though I was learning Hebrew for my bat mitzvah, I was spending time with Jewish people. I was, raised in Lexington, Kentucky. So if you want to be a Jew in Lexington, Kentucky, at least at the time, you have to actively seek out Jewish community. And that was normal for me when my parents, were carting me to and from Hebrew school, Sunday school, all these different events. But when I got to college, that was my first time into the adult world, and I did not actively seek out Hillel. I had never heard of Chabad.
Hmm.
So I just, it's not even that I rejected Jewish life. It's just that it just didn't come up for me.
And all these other things came up instead.
Yes.
So far left academia is largely focused on deconstruction,
Mhm,
dismantling systems, critiquing state power,
mhm,
and challenging institutions. Your current work at JPSA
mhm.
is about construction, building resilience, strengthening community, and fostering continuity. Has your definition of doing justice changed as you moved from the lecture hall to the communal center?
It has.
Tell us about
Um,
that.
When I was in college, I learned to understand social justice as something that was primarily enacted on the streets. And I learned that people who are doing street based activism had the real truth, the real knowledge. This is something I learned in my justice theory courses in the university. um, when I actually began encountering myself as a minority and anti Semitism directly, this was within institutions. I wasn't dealing with, swastikas and getting called all the words that you can imagine. I was dealing with authorities within the university system, very respected people who were saying things behind closed doors that I knew were unethical. And so, for that reason, I had to learn how to use the legal system very quickly, like very quickly. And no amount of chanting or waving posters, anything like that wouldn't have helped me in my position.
It's always daunting to have to turn to the legal system
Mhm.
in this country or probably
Fortunate
most
to have it.
countries. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure you could probably switch careers and become an attorney at this point if you
I
wanted
don't know about that.
to. um, so you defended a dissertation that utilized standard progressive paradigms to critique American institutions, naming concepts like Christofascism and white ignorance.
Yes.
Um,
Can I preface that for a second?
yeah,
So, my research almost, as I've shared with you, almost didn't make it through the dissertation process. My research was taken to the Institutional Review Board. There were a lot of concerns with how I was framing Jewish identity um, from a progressive position in particular, because I did consider myself a progressive. The reason that it's titled Christofascism is because I couldn't include Islamofascism.
wow,
So that would have
that's good to
changed the
know.
dissertation a
It's
lot.
very good to know. So
Yeah,
that was off limits
yes.
in the
Yes, it was.
because we really believe in openness, don't we? In academia.
I thought so.
If you were writing your dissertation, Modern Slavery Unmasked, today, how would it differ?
I can't even imagine how it would differ because it unfolded in such a messy and organic and just very chaotic way.
Mm,
I don't think that it could ever be rewritten again.
it would be a completely different dissertation, sounds
It
like.
would be, and I wrote the parts about Jewish identity and anti-Semitism at the end. So I started writing from the perspective of a white woman. By the end, I had included these chapters about Jewish identity
Mm.
because I recognized that those were missing.
So, knowing what you know now
Yeah.
about how mainstream Jewish identity is erased by the political left,
Mhm.
would you frame the intersections of race, religion, and justice differently?
The intersections of race, religion, and justice. When I think of intersections, I think of Kim Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality. And when I think of that, that idea is about specifically intersections of identity. So to me, justice wouldn't fit with those other two intersections, if you know what I mean. Um,
What do you mean by that?
because intersectionality is fundamentally supposed to be an understanding of how identity works within different social and historical contexts,
Mm.
and it's often misused in ways that don't really reflect the meaning of the term. Intersectionality is it's an American term, so it works within categories of American race politics, American gender sexuality politics. It doesn't work outside of that. So,
Mm.
for example, you have this organization, which I'm sure they're doing great work, but the Jews of Color Initiative, a wonderful initiative. But that framework, that organization would only work in the United States because if you were to say Jews of color in Israel, that'd be quite redundant, wouldn't it? It just doesn't quite fit. Um, so ultimately, what I'm saying is that intersectionality doesn't really work for the Jewish people because the theory itself miscategorizes who we are. Um, we don't fit into the white slot. We don't fit into the religious slot. We actually are. We are the fundamental intersectional group, if you ask me, honestly, because we are, an ethnicity. We're a nation of people. We're a religion. What am I missing? You're the rabbi.
I don't know. I appreciate what you're saying about the Jewish people, and I agree with that. I have a trouble, even in the categorization in the United States of America with other people. This whole notion of whiteness. I was
Hmm.
speaking uh, with another guest recently who was talking about how Italians were never considered white. Lots of
Sure.
people. When Americans have these broad sweeping categories that we've really invented and promoted, white, black, brown, all the, or whatever, however we want to call these people, it's disingenuous in my mind because, Europeans never viewed themselves as monolithic, and, each group, they don't view themselves as a race, really. They view, maybe they do because they're affected by this thinking, and maybe they've synthesized that today, but they didn't historically do that. They just kind of, if you were from Germany, you probably didn't feel a lot of commonality with people from Greece,
Hmm.
or the Balkans, or other places, or Eastern Europe, or Spain for that matter, or the differences from Sweden all the way down to Southern Europe and the Mediterranean, and and then on top of that, when you look at Africa, I mean, to say somebody's black, I mean, we have so many different people with African heritage, and Africa is a huge place, and obviously people from Nigeria don't feel a lot in common with people from Ethiopia, and vice versa, and in between. And so, as outsiders, I think Americans are looking at these people. These are black people. And obviously, if you're a recent immigrant to the United States from Nigeria, and I've said it before, one of the most least incarcerated groups of
Hmm.
Americans,
Hmm.
but you look black, and so you're categorized as in the same vantage point as people look at the descendants of slaves. I think it's disingenuous to kind of like have these categories in general, but this is kind of like, we're so used to in America checking these boxes. What are you? And I've never felt, um, also as an Ashkenazi Jew, and who Ashkenazi Jews we're supposed to be these white colonizers or something, and we were never white, and we are not white, and Hitler killed us because we weren't of the correct race. But nevertheless, I don't feel that I fit in. I don't want to check off white, but if I were from Sweden, I don't know that I would want, and I wasn't Jewish, I don't know that I would want to check off white either. Like, I don't know what that does, and who are we? So I kind of have a fundamental issue with these categories, and I'm kind of also appreciating what Coleman Hughes has written about it.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. It sounds like you're not ready to, and that's okay. You're not ready to dispense with all of this thinking. It's just the main thing is that the Jewish people don't fit into it.
Yeah, they don't fit into it, and the idea of race is superimposed onto us.
Mhm,
We didn't, we're not identifying ourselves as white, as a group of people. Sure, you have individual Jews who might be walking around on campus or, wherever activist spaces who do identify as white, but I think it's the key point to me is that the majority of us do not identify as white.
mhm.
And that's incredibly important. And of course, I'm sure you've heard the line, well, Hitler wouldn't have cared, if you identified as Jewish or not. But that is actually quite an important point, I think.
I agree with that. In your doctoral work, you analyze the concept of Jewish racelessness.
Hmm.
On the far left, this concept is often weaponized to strip Jews of their distinct ethnic and ancestral history, flattening them into white oppressors, as we just mentioned. How do you reframe your own academic insights on Jewish identity to defend Zionism and Jewish peoplehood today?
Hmm. Well, I wouldn't say that. Okay, no, that's not true. I use the same approach that I learned in school to apply to all other minority groups, which is that minority groups get to define themselves for themselves. And so, as simple as that, um, the Jewish people as a group, I'm not saying all Jews, but as a group, understand Zionism as Jewish collective determination within their ancestral homeland. That was not something I understood before I got to college. And so that alone is incredibly important to me.
Mm.
And that really was sort of when a light bulb went off for me when I realized, oh, there is actually something like, yes, Jews have all sorts of different opinions, but there are things that we fundamentally share across denominations around the world. And that is the big one to me.
Eye opening. Your early work focused heavily on the dangers of Christian nationalism and the evangelical rescue industry.
Mhm.
And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are not familiar with the evangelical rescue industry, and I wasn't until I did little research. Um, Very fascinating. Now that you're working within the pro-Israel political center, how do you navigate the complex relationship between the Jewish community and Christian Zionists, who are often the strongest allies of Israel, but represent a political ideology you used to or maybe still critique?
Christian Zionism. So my understanding of Christian Zionism comes, if I'm being honest, purely from the critiques that I've received from the left by supporting Israel. I know not that much about Christian Zionism. What I am familiar with is this idea that Christian Zionists want all of the Jews to gather in Israel so that there can be like a second coming of Jesus or
Yeah,
something.
that's a
That's a
misnomer.
right. So that's the only thing that I have heard about that. I don't I don't know. I appreciate people supporting Israel. I have just as many questions for people who support Israel as I do for people who don't support Israel. It really just depends on where they're coming from. Um, I don't know. I don't have all of the answers to all of these things. I
That's
came from
beautiful.
like a really specific perspective.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um, wow, and by the way, the evangelical rescue industry has to do
Mhm.
with sex workers, isn't that what it,
Yeah, and the thing is that if I could rewrite my dissertation now, I wouldn't because that would be miserable. Um, but I come from a very particular ideological perspective. So my master's degree is in criminology. We began from the perspective that crime is a social construction. So we really didn't focus on individual crime whatsoever. We focused on the crimes of the state. So we focus on crimes of police
It's interesting how, like,
mainly.
if crime is a social construction,
Hmm.
but yet we can definitely adjudicate, the state and say that, "No, there's a set
Hmm.
criteria for the state."
Yes. Yes.
That's that seems, there's a disconnect there.
It's a huge problem, and it's very frustrating that I come from a criminology program because when I entered it, I thought I was going to be a cop, honestly. I thought I'd be
Mm.
a law enforcement officer, not knowing very much about what the job entailed. But through that master's degree, I did not become more familiar with what law enforcement actually do on the ground. I became familiar with the critiques of law enforcement from academics, largely who do not have a background in law enforcement.
How fascinating.
Yes, so this is incredibly dangerous now looking forward to today when the Jewish people are very much need law enforcement, whether they believe this or not, whether they believe that, anti-Semitism is just a moral panic. It's not real, that it's security theater that we're engaging in. It's very important that we understand that law enforcement are also members of our community who are just doing their jobs trying to protect people in the grand scheme of things without going down a long
Right.
you know what I mean.
Sounds like a very long theoretical
Oh, yes.
thinking on how legalism and law works, where it comes from, and
Yes.
on the one hand, everything can be relative and cultural, and on the and from another point of view, there are kind of ideas that come from elsewhere that are imposed upon us, and so it's a lot to synthesize there. Appreciate your honesty about that, and as there's a lot to learn about Christian Zionists. I'll be happy to introduce you to some
Oh,
friends of
thank God.
mine.
Yeah.
um, yeah, a lot of Jews have this misnomer about that they just want to round us, bring us to Israel, so to hasten the second coming
Yeah.
and bring messianic times. But the basic, and we've talked about it on the show. One of my very first, I think maybe my first interview was with my dear friend Pastor Jeff Logston, who I'm going to Israel, God willing, with
Yep.
if this war allows it, coming up real soon. Is the notion that they have is that it comes from the book of Genesis. Those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be
Mhm.
cursed. It's more, they feel that it's a mitzvah for them really to stand with the Jewish people, which is contrary to what we've seen in Jewish history, obviously, from Christian groups who have, would rather choose to burn us at the stake in order to save our souls. So there is a lot for us. It's hard for us to even trust that given our history. You kind of switching careers, but still dealing with the legal system. You ended up having to have a lawsuit against Northern Arizona University. Um,
I did.
so you partnered with groups like Stand With Us, who, who are firmly rooted in pro-Israel mainstream. And for someone coming from a far left academic background, what was it like to find your strongest advocates and protectors in the political center, or maybe even political right, rather than your academic peers?
It was shocking. It was incredibly shocking. I started seeking out legal counsel shortly after 10/7, just having written my dissertation, uh, and I was in the process of teaching a course that I personally curated on anti-Semitism at the university. I knew I was going to very likely have problems, so I was a brand new college professor, and I started contacting every, Jewish pro bono advocacy group that I could find, legal advocacy group. So I contacted the Lawfare Project, Brandeis, Stand With Us, the Deborah Project. There are others, but ultimately, it wasn't about the organization. It was about the lawyer who was most responsive to me. And took my concerns seriously.
Mm.
And there was nothing, we didn't talk about our political beliefs at all. We talked about what was happening on the ground on college campuses. We weren't talking about what was going on in the Middle East. We were talking about anti Semitism that was occurring against Jewish students and faculty at the university
It sounds
by other people at the university.
and it sounds like on a human to human level, you were able to develop enough trust
Yes.
to.
Very much. The day that I was terminated from my position, I contacted Stand With Us, one particular lawyer, Dee Dee Betran, who has done a lot of really important work in the area of anti-Semitism and law, and she had gotten in touch with Mark Goldfeder of the National Jewish Advocacy Center. Within 24 hours, he was my lawyer. So I
Oh,
am forever indebted to these 2 people, for what they did for me because I would not have been able to have the success that I did without their support.
if you're listening and you're having legal challenges or you're experiencing anti-Semitism on campus or anywhere in American society, I want to encourage you to connect with Stand With Us.
Yes.
They're a fantastic organization, really doing grassroots work and defending the Jewish people. I'm glad that you were able to benefit from that directly.
Me too.
From your current vantage point, can the modern university campus be saved from its current ideological excesses, or has the academic left become too deeply entrenched in anti Zionism to reform?
I have a lot of faith in the undergraduate students who are in the university. Um, I think a lot of them are just getting into this world. I think that a lot of them have very good intentions. They're there to learn. They're there because they want to, become better people, figure out what career they want. But it is incredibly challenging with all of the social pressures and incentive structure that exists that faculty and administrators put in front of students just so that they can get these degrees. So I wouldn't be doing this work if I thought that the university was fundamentally unable to save itself.
Hmm.
I think that there are different parts of the university, different universities around the country, where certain departments, certain colleges are, doing their best to avoid anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and any of these politics altogether. Um, as for other fields like justice studies, like sociology, anthropology, increasingly psychology, I am concerned for the direction that these disciplines are going in.
That's very telling. The political center can sometimes be mischaracterized as passive or compromising, but your work seems to define it as a place of active defense and robust pride. What does a centrist pro Israel approach to Jewish advocacy look like, and why is it more effective than the extremes of the right or left?
Mm. I think it's sort of similar to something that I said earlier, which is that, um, you know, centrist or whatever political advocacy for the Jewish people is not about pushing any particular agenda other than the safety, dignity, and resiliency of the Jewish people. That's it. So, as long as we fundamentally recognize that we are a people that come from the land of Israel, um, we do share a particular language, we celebrate a particular set of holidays. We are a family of people, whether we're Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, like we all do share some basic things in common. And I think it's really important that we recognize that and begin from there with any work that we do because I just came from a university setting where I could not be openly Jewish on campus without feeling very, very uncomfortable. So every day that I show up to Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona, every time that I walk around in this community into different Jewish spaces, I feel so good that I can just be openly Jewish and that's our starting point, you know?
That's good to hear and horrible to hear at the same time, because the fact that you had to feel so unsafe and unable to express yourself Jewishly in those public spaces gives a snapshot into where we are in this country at this time.
Yes, and I do think it's important to just stress the point that this is not just at Ivy League campuses. This is not just happening in certain parts of the country. There is not a college in the country that is untouched by anti-Semitism. And all 3 state schools here have a serious problem with anti-Semitism. We know this from the encampments, we know this from the faculty networks, we know this from the administrative networks, we know this because the faculty are very much embedded in local community organizing. This is incredibly, incredibly important for us to all get involved because this is just not something that JPSA can tackle on its own.
Is it something that we tackle head on? Do we meet with those people who are the most flagrant, or is there a lower hanging fruit kind of strategy, or how do you go about trying to make a difference in that climate?
I think we have to go, we have to address as much as we can and as many people as we can reach. I don't think that there's really a lot of use as someone from that came from an anti-Zionist background. There's not a lot of use in trying to persuade anti-Zionists to come to, the pro-Israel side or whatever that looks like for different people because that's a personal journey. That's something that they need to be able to figure out on their own. If they're curious, I would offer resources, I would offer perspective, but there's no point in trying to change people
Mm,
at all. Um, as for everyone else, I think that if people are somewhere in like a central centrist area, yeah, people are always open to usually changing their minds. I think people don't want to walk around with the wrong information at all. Um, So I think that there are more people that we could reach than not. As for how to do it,
we're figuring it out, it sounds like.
there are a lot of different tools and approaches that people are using, that we need, that we're still kind of trying to revamp.
Well, we really appreciate you having being in the helm on this. It's an important position, and in your role at the Center for Jewish Resilience, you focus on Jewish identity education.
Mhm.
How do we teach the next generation of Jewish students to navigate hostile environments? Are we preparing them to argue back using academic language, or are we anchoring them in a deeper, more primal sense of Jewish identity and history?
I think the deeper sense of primal Jewish identity and history is incredibly important for initiatives like Hebrew High, which we're starting up, in August of this year. Um, as for the other side of it, I don't think that we should be teaching students how to argue their identities to people. I think that we do need to equip them with the skills to navigate their institutions that they're going to be walking into, though. They need to know what the rules are, they need to know what the policies are. They need to know that they should have a student handbook as soon as they get to whatever school that they're going to. Um, because that's really the best way to be able to protect yourself is to understand the rules of the game, the rules of the institutions because that's all that you really have to push back on.
It sounds scary and frightening, for
Mhm.
young Jews. Like I can imagine that some of our young people would be um, maybe tempted to just throw in the towel and not seek out higher education.
Yeah, and I know a lot of students who, that, they did kind of waver in those directions, and it can be really overwhelming and frightening. My hope is that in the work that I do, that I'm going to be able to help students feel more comfortable tackling these big institutional issues because frankly, the universities aren't doing a great job. I know our students can do better. I really do. Um, and at the Center for Jewish Resilience, we're working really hard on this sort of institutional literacy that we really need students to be able to understand in order to handle the anti Semitism that they're experiencing early on before it kind of keeps getting worse and going higher and higher in the university system, for example.
You mentioned the Hebrew High
Hmm.
initiative.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that and what you have in mind?
Yeah, so we're starting Hebrew High in the fall. It's going to be at THA, at Tucson Hebrew Academy. And we're kind of trying to take a different approach through the Center of Jewish Resilience with Now, in our first year, we're not sure how many people are going to be interested in attending, but we want to take this approach that will really equip students to better understand the foundations of their identity on their own terms, but also in ways that their peers can understand. So, we would use ideas like intersectionality so that students can articulate, the intersections of race, ethnicity, peoplehood for themselves, but also for their peers so that they're using a shared language to articulate their identity, if that makes sense.
So working within the system.
Right. Well, yes. So that would be sort of a theoretical course. We're of course going down the history of Zionism, but the very broad idea is to take this very dense theory course originally and then apply it to community work, whether that's, students being able to come with us through the Center for Jewish Resilience and advocate with us at Day at the State for things like HB 2867, which we were unsuccessful at passing last year. Or if they're able
Tell our listeners about that piece of
yeah,
legislation.
of course. So last year, there was a piece of legislation that it was called HB 2867. It was something that was supposed to protect Jewish students and faculty on college campuses and in K through 12 from anti-Semitism. This bill was very controversial. I think there's some really good arguments as to why it was controversial. People were really concerned that it was going to target individual teachers. For free speech, it would silence people, and I certainly understand those concerns. There's also the criticism that, well, we already have mechanisms in place to, combat racism or discrimination in the K through 12 and university system. But I can tell you from personal experience that just because we have those mechanisms doesn't mean that they're being enforced. We actually have to have the people in power to enforce these mechanisms. So this legislation ultimately it was supported by a lot of students. This is actually how I got involved with Jewish Philanthropies of Southern Arizona. I met our director of public affairs through this. I met our CEO through this work because we were not getting a lot of support from other major cities that were supposed to be working with us. So
Mm.
but even though we brought forward our testimony around this legislation, and we brought students from Hillel and Chabad, undergrads and graduate students, unfortunately, our testimony was not heard, and this legislation was struck down. They have brought it up under a different name this year. And while it's passed the House and it's passed the Senate, it's now going to the governor's desk. And
It's a
we're
good
not
chance
sure.
she'll veto it again. Or
There's a very good chance we think that she might veto it again.
Governor, if you're listening, and I hope you are listening to the Rabbi Avi show,
Please.
um, don't listen to these voices, the extremist voices who are maybe the loudest, and some people who aren't even Jewish who are coming out to try to say these things on behalf of our people. We know we have a much more unified voice than you might imagine, and the vast majority of the Jewish people are speaking up, and we want this. We want to see society move into a better place here, and so we hope that you will pay attention to the koach, the force behind this, and look if it's passing both sides of. That's pretty impressive to go through the state legislature like that.
It is, and I would like to add that the organizations that were pushing back against this legislation, I certainly understand their concerns. None of these organizations are actually involved in K through 12 or higher education, so they do not have the direct experiences that faculty, Jewish faculty and Jewish students have been having, particularly since 10/7. So they may just not be aware of what they're advocating against.
Perfect. You have transitioned, as we've said, from a career inside the ivory tower, if you will, of academia, to a role deeply embedded in the civic fabric of Southern Arizona. When you look at the unique landscape of the Jewish community here in Tucson, what gives you the most hope?
Oh my gosh, this community gives me so much hope. I love Tucson. I love Jewish Tucson. I started calling it Jewson when I first got here, but no one seemed to They didn't seem to love that. They didn't pick up. It's fine. No matter it's fine. But again, I came from Lexington, Kentucky, so we had one Reform synagogue, we had one conservative synagogue, and they did not interact at all.
Wow.
Um, I spent this past week taking around our new shaliach to meet different rabbis, different community members. We didn't get to you, but you next, you
All right,
next.
good.
And it was really exciting for me to be able to share with him that, yeah, actually, this community has issues like any other community, but fundamentally, we work together. We really do. And one of my first experiences here in Tucson was around the 10/7 memorial, and I just remember being so shocked to see Orthodox rabbis interacting with conservative rabbis, with I assume Reform rabbis wearing like a rainbow yarmulke. It was just I've never seen anything like that, and I just thought that was so beautiful. And I really do get a sense that even if different Jewish communities or individuals in Tucson have a lot of different perspectives about what it means to be Jewish and what it means to live a Jewish life, that ultimately this community is on the same page and that we really do want what's best for the Jewish people. And people here are actually willing to go out and fight for the Jewish people. And that's not something that I've had in other communities.
It's good to hear. I will tell you that Tucson has not always been this way.
Yeah.
And I think we are in a very good chapter right now, and I hope that continues and even gets better.
Yes.
As an individual scholar and advocate who has been through the fire, really through the fire, what is your personal vision for the future of American Jewry? And I know that you're still learning. We're all still learning. And what role do you hope to play in shaping it?
Mm. I think that we need a much stronger and deeper connection to who we are. I don't know how to do that without a stronger understanding of why American Jews should care about Israel, if I'm being honest. I'm not talking about the politics at all. I'm speaking from an intellectual standpoint, and that the Jewish people know that we are connected to the land of Israel, not just because of religious teachings, but because of archaeology, because of language, because of shared ancestry. This is something that's being fundamentally challenged in the university system, largely through theories like postmodernism and decolonial theory. So these are the things that we're really up against. As for the future of Jewish life, I think we really need to understand and explore Jewish American life here, like in the United States, because we have a really rich history. That's something else I think that Tucson does really well, like with the Holocaust Museum. They have a really great exhibit about the history of Jews in the Southwest. This is not something I've seen in other communities. I think that's great. Um, and it's something that can sort of give American Jews a grounding of who they are. The governor just passed, I think, some sort of mandate, or I don't know what they called it, but for Jewish American Heritage Month. That's wonderful. I would have never even guessed that that was something that could be a thing. But learning how to celebrate our culture, just like all these other minority groups in the United States are able to celebrate their cultures and recognize the connections between their cultures and one another, I think these are things that will really, really strengthen the future of Jewish identity and a sense of belonging as American Jews here in this country. As for my role,
Yes.
I wanna do all of it. I don't know. I'm doing a lot of stuff right now to combat anti-Semitism, unfortunately, on campus. It's work that I love, to do, but I would like to move more towards focusing on, building Jewish identity and pride and a sense of our own history. I really had no sense of Jewish history, like, in my for myself growing up, and that's something that has been changing, and the more that I learn about myself and the Jewish people here in the United States and in Israel and around the entire diaspora, the stronger I feel in my sense of identity.
Dr. Molly Dunn, thank you so much for gracing us on the Rabbi Avi Show.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
What a powerful note to end on. Molly, I want to thank you. It takes immense intellectual honesty to look at the ideological frameworks you've spent a lifetime mastering, recognize their blind spots, and have the courage to shift your priorities when reality demands it. Your journey from deconstructing systems in the lecture hall to actively constructing resilience and identity for the Jewish community here in Southern Arizona is not just inspiring, it's a blueprint for where we need to go next. To everyone listening, what Dr. Dunn's story reminds us is that true justice isn't found in a theory that flattens our identity. It's found in the active, courageous building of our community and the proud reclamation of our history. Thank you for joining us on the Rabbi Avi Show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. And support us. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and keep building.